For 2 years, the most dangerous boys in school bullied the quiet scholarship girl, until the night they watched her take down 4 armed men in 11 seconds. That was the moment they realized the truth. The girl they called the Mouse was a mafia princess hiding in their classroom.
The first thing you noticed about Blackridge Elite High School was the money. It was everywhere, in the shining floors, in the expensive perfume that drifted through the hallways, and the way students walked like the whole world belonged to them. Blackridge was not a school for ordinary people. It was a place where the children of powerful men came to sharpen their teeth before inheriting their father's empires. And then there was Elena Moretti. She walked through those same hallways every morning with her head slightly down, her old uniform pressed but clearly worn at the edges, her dark hair tied neatly at the back of her neck. She carried a second-hand bag and kept her books close to her chest like a shield. She never smiled too wide, never laughed too loud, never drew attention to herself. That was the plan. Stay invisible, stay safe, stay alive. She had been at Blackridge for 2 years now, and in those 2 years, she had become very good at being nobody. Teachers called on her only when no one else raised a hand. She sat at the back of every class. She ate lunch alone by the small garden near the science block, away from the noise of the cafeteria, away from them. The Black Kings. That was what the whole school called them, though never to their faces. They had no official name, no formal group. They didn't need one. Power like theirs didn't need a label. Everyone just knew. Adrian Volkov was the coldest of them all. He was tall with sharp features and pale gray eyes that seemed to see through everything. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it never reached those eyes. His family ran one of the most feared Russian crime networks in Europe, and he carried that weight like it was a crown. In class, he was frighteningly brilliant. Outside of class, he was the kind of person that even teachers walked carefully around. Luca De Luca was the charming one, and that made him the most dangerous. He had warm brown skin, an easy smile, and a laugh that could make you forget he was capable of anything terrible. He joked with everyone, flirted effortlessly, and could make you feel like his best friend in the world right before he ruined you. His family had roots in the Italian underworld, and he wore that history like expensive cologne. Kai Nakamura was quiet, dangerously quiet. He was the kind of boy who sat in the corner of a room and saw everything, every glance, every whispered word, every small betrayal. He never raised his voice. He never had to. When Kai looked at you long enough, you felt exposed, like he had already figured out every secret you had. His father ran a powerful network across East Asia, and Kai had clearly learned from the best. Then there was Dante Rivera, the fighter. He was broad-shouldered with dark eyes that held a permanent storm inside them. He didn't bully with words. He bullied with presence, standing too close, blocking a doorway, letting his gaze linger until the other person looked away first. He had grown up in the roughest corners of the underground, and he hadn't left those corners behind. He just brought them here. Together, they owned Blackridge. No teacher challenged them. No student crossed them. Even the school's wealthy heirs gave them wide berths. And for reasons Elena had never fully understood, they had decided that she was their favorite target. It had started small, the way these things always do. A smirk when she walked past. A whispered comment. A chair pulled out just as she was about to sit down. Luca had started calling her the scholarship mouse, a name that had spread through the school like a virus. Adrian had once picked up her textbook, flipped through it with a bored expression, and dropped it in a puddle without a word. Dante had bumped into her hard enough to send her books scattering across the hallway, then stepped over them without looking back. Kai had never done anything directly. He just watched, and somehow, that was worse. Elena had endured all of it with the same quiet stillness she brought to everything else. She picked up her books. She dried her textbook. She sat somewhere else. She said nothing, because drawing attention, real attention, was the one thing she could not afford. She had a secret that could get her killed, and she intended to keep it. 3 years ago, Elena Moretti had not been nobody. 3 years ago, she had been the daughter of Don Carlo Moretti, the most feared and respected man in the Italian-American crime world. The Moretti name was not just a name. It was a legacy, a dynasty, a promise written in blood and silence over 3 generations. Elena had grown up inside that world. Not in the dark corners of it. Her father had kept her away from the worst of it, but she had always known what her family was. She had seen enough to understand power. She had been trained quietly and carefully by people her father trusted, not because he wanted her to be a weapon, but because he wanted her to be safe. The world we live in will not protect you just because you are young, her father had told her once, when she was 12 and he was teaching her how to read a room full of dangerous men. You must know how to protect yourself. And so she had learned languages, strategy, how to read people, how to fight when there was no other option, how to be still when everything inside you was screaming. She had been 15 when her father was killed. It had happened at dinner on an ordinary Tuesday evening. A gunshot through the window of their dining room. Clean, professional, the kind of hit that took planning. The kind of hit that came from inside. Her father's brother, her uncle Marco, had taken control of the Moretti Empire within 48 hours. The speed of it had told Elena everything she needed to know. Marco had been ready. Marco had been waiting. And within a week, 2 separate attempts had been made on Elena's life. She had survived both. Barely. Her father's most trusted soldier, a quiet man named Sergio who had been with the family for 20 years, had come to her in the night. He had a plan, a safe house, a new identity, a school far away from the life that wanted her dead. Your father always said you were the smartest Moretti, Sergio had told her as they drove through the dark. He said the empire should be yours one day. But you can't claim what you can't survive to claim, and so Elena Moretti had disappeared. She had become Elena Russo, a scholarship student from a modest family, with a carefully constructed history and no ties to anything dangerous. She had buried herself in the role so deeply that some days she almost forgot it was a role at all. But not always. Not at night, when she lay in her small dormitory bed and thought about her father. Not when she opened the secret encrypted files Sergio sent her every month, reports on Marco's movements, the state of the empire, the enemies who were still looking for the Don's missing daughter. She was not hiding forever. She was waiting, building, preparing. When the time came, she was going to take everything back. But that time was not yet. For now, she was the scholarship mouse, the nobody, the quiet girl at the back of the class. She just had to be patient. Worst day came on a Thursday in November. Elena had been in the library, working on a strategy paper economics class. She was alone. The library closed in 20 minutes and everyone else had already left. She was so focused on her work that she didn't hear the door open. She looked up to find Dante Rivera leaning against the shelf nearest to her table. Behind him stood 2 of his usual followers, boys whose names she had never bothered to learn because they were not interesting enough to be dangerous. "Working late, Mouse?" Dante said. He pushed off the shelf and walked toward her slowly, the way a person walks when they know they have all the time in the world. Elena closed her notebook. She said nothing. "I heard you got the highest score in the economics test last week." He stopped at her table and looked down at her. "Higher than Adrian." A pause. "He didn't like that. That's between me and him," Elena said quietly. Something shifted in Dandy's eyes. He didn't like being answered back. She watched him reach out and sweep her notebook off the table. It hit the floor and slid under a shelf. "Pick it up," he said. Elena looked at the shelf. Then she looked at Dante. She could feel the old training rising in her like a tide, the part of her that had learned exactly how to handle men like this. The part that cataloged exits, measured distances, assessed threats. She pushed it back down. "Not yet. Not here. Not like this." She got up, walked to the shelf, and crouched to retrieve her notebook. Behind her, she heard the 2 boys laugh. She heard Dante say something under his breath that made them laugh harder. She kept her face blank as she straightened up and began gathering her things. "Every day I wonder why you're still here," Dante said. "You don't belong in the school." Elena picked up her bag. "Good night," she said, and walked out. She made it to the end of the corridor before she stopped walking. She pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes for one moment, just one, and let herself feel it. The humiliation, the anger, the deep, quiet fury that lived in her chest like a banked fire. Then she breathed out, opened her eyes, straightened her back, and kept walking. She had endured worse than Dante Rivera. She would endure this too. But in her dormitory that night, she opened her laptop and sent a message to Sergio. "How much longer?" His reply came an hour later. "Soon. Marco is making mistakes. Keep your head down. Stay safe." Elena stared at the message for a long time. Then she closed the laptop and lay in the dark. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself think about what soon would feel like. It happened on a Friday in December, the kind of cold night that made the streets feel empty even when they weren't. Elena had stayed late on campus for a study session that had run longer than planned. The campus grounds were quiet as she took the shortcut through the back gardens toward the dormitories, a path she had used dozens of times before. She heard them before she saw them. Four men, moving with the kind of purposefulness that didn't belong in a school garden. She slowed her pace without stopping. Her eyes swept the area exits, distances, the weight of her bag. What was in it? They stepped out of the shadows ahead of her. Elena Moretti, the man in front, said. He was heavy-set, with a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. He smiled, which made it worse. "Took a long time to find you." Elena stopped walking. She felt the cold night air against her face and thought, very clearly, "Here we go." "You have the wrong person," she said. "No, we don't." Another man moved around to her left. She tracked him without turning her head. "Marco Moretti sends his regards. He'd like you to come with us quietly." "I don't think I'll do that," Elena said. The man with the scar tilted his head, like she was something mildly amusing. Then he nodded to the man on her left, who pulled a gun. And Elena Moretti stopped pretending to be weak. What happened next took approximately 11 seconds. She moved left first into the gunman, not away from him, which he clearly didn't expect. She caught his wrist with both hands, twisted sharply, and the gun clattered to the ground. He yelped. She used his momentum to spin him into the man who had been moving up on her right, sending them both stumbling into the hedge. She kicked the gun under the bushes. The man with the scar charged. She sidestepped, let him go past, caught his arm and used his own speed against him, a sharp, controlled movement that sent him face first into the garden wall. He hit it hard and slid down. The fourth man had gone for his own weapon. He got it halfway out of his jacket before Elena was in front of him. One precise strike to the inside of his wrist. The gun dropped. A second strike to the pressure point at the side of his neck. He went down to one knee, gasping. She retrieved the first gun from under the bush, checked it loaded, held it at her side. The four men were on the ground, disarmed, winded. The whole thing had taken less time than it took to pour a glass of water. "Tell Marco," Elena said, her voice completely calm, "that the next people he sends won't go home." A long silence. "Kneel," she said. One by one, slowly. They did. Elena stood there for a moment, looking at them four grown men who had been sent to take her, now kneeling in a school garden. She felt something move through her that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite satisfaction. It was more like recognition, like coming back to herself after a very long time away. Then she heard a sound from her right and turned. Four boys stood at the garden entrance, completely still, staring at her. Adrian, Luca, Kai, Dante. She had no idea how long they had been there. Long enough, clearly. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sounds were the distant noise of campus and the quiet breathing of four men kneeling in the cold. Elena looked at the Black Kings. The Black Kings looked at Elena. Luca's easy smile was entirely gone. Kai's sharp eyes were moving over the scene with an expression Elena had never seen on him before, something close to shock, though he was fighting it hard. Dante was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Adrian was the most unsettling. His pale gray eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. "Campus security will be here in about 2 minutes," she said. Her voice was steady. "You should go." She turned back to the men on the ground, called campus security on her phone, and waited. When she turned around again, the four boys were gone. Elena exhaled slowly. Well, that had not been part of the plan. The four of them didn't speak until they reached Adrian's private dorm suite, the best rooms in the school, which Adrian occupied because his family had apparently donated an entire wing of the building. Lucas sat on the edge of the desk and stared at the wall. Dante stood by the window with his arms crossed. Kai lowered himself into a chair and was immediately, absolutely still. Adrian stood in the center of the room. "Well, Luca said finally, and his voice was different, flattened out, stripped of its usual charm. That was something. 4 men, Dante said. She took down 4 men in under 15 seconds. Armed men. 12 seconds. Kai said quietly, and she disarmed the first one in less than 3. A silence. She called him Marco, Adrian said. He hadn't moved. She said, "Tell Marco the next people he sends won't go home." His gray eyes moved slowly around the room. Marco Moretti is the current head of the Moretti crime family. He took control 3 years ago after his brother was assassinated. Another silence. Longer this time. His brother had a daughter, Kai said. Adrian looked at him. Yes. Who disappeared after the assassination? Kai continued. There have been rumors for years that the daughter was alive, that she was hiding, that Marco has people looking for her. Luca let out a slow breath. Elena Russo. He paused. Elena Moretti. She's been here for 2 years, Dante said. His voice was strange. Right here. He stopped. We've been making her life difficult, Luca finished. He didn't say it with his usual lightness. He said it the way you say something when you're starting to understand that you've made a mistake. While she was hiding from people who want her dead, Adrian sat down. He was quiet for a long time. She knew who we were, he said finally. She knew our families, our backgrounds. She knew exactly what we were. He paused. And she never used any of it. She just endured. Because she couldn't afford to draw attention, Kai said. Revealing that she knew about our families would have raised questions about her own background. She had to stay invisible. And we kept making that harder, Dante said. The room was very quiet. Adrian stood up again. His jaw was set. Those men tonight were connected to her uncle's organization, which means they know she's here, which means others will come. Then what do we do? Luca asked. Adrian looked at him for a moment, then at Dante, then at Kai, who gave a small nod. We make sure nobody touches her, Adrian said. Elena noticed the change on Monday morning. She was walking to her first class when Dante fell into step beside her. Not behind her, not in front of her, beside her. She glanced at him sideways. He was looking straight ahead. What are you doing? She said. Walking, he said. I can see that. Then why did you ask? She didn't respond to that. They walked in silence until they reached her classroom. Dante stopped at the door and leaned against the wall. Do you need something? Elena asked. No, he said. And he just stood there, like a wall between her and the rest of the hallway. At lunch, Luca appeared at her table in the garden. He sat down across from her without asking, set a coffee in front of her, and said, "You look like someone who drinks their coffee black." She stared at the coffee, then at him. What is happening? She said. Luca folded his hands on the table. The easy smile was there, but there was something behind it now, something more serious, more careful. We owe you an apology. Elena's expression didn't change. I don't want your apology. I know, but I'm giving it anyway. He paused. We didn't know who you were. It wouldn't have mattered, she said. You didn't have a right to treat anyone the way you treated me, regardless of who I was. Luca was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. You're right, he said. That's fair. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the coffee and drank. It was exactly how she liked it. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't tell him to leave either. Adrian was more direct. He found her in the library that afternoon, sat across from her, and said without preamble, Your uncle's men know where you are. More will come. I know, Elena said. You should have backup. I have a plan. Plans fail. His gray eyes were steady on hers. People don't. She looked back at him. Are you offering to be my backup? We're offering to make sure you don't get killed on our campus, he said. Whether you choose to use that offer is up to you. Kai was last. He didn't come to her, he was simply there one morning when she arrived at the library, sitting in the chair closest to the door, reading. He looked up when she walked in, said nothing, went back to his book. But when a group of third years who had been making increasingly unpleasant comments about her walked past the library window, Kai looked up and held the eye of their leader for exactly 3 seconds. The group crossed to the other side of the path and kept walking. Elena watched this happen. Then she sat down at her usual table and opened her own book. Thank you, she said quietly. I didn't do anything. Kai said, I know, she said. That's what makes it interesting. A small pause. And then, so faint she almost missed it, she heard him exhale something that might have been a laugh. The peace didn't last, of course. It never did. 3 weeks after the garden, 2 more men came. They were smarter than the first 4, better dressed, better armed, better at pretending to belong somewhere. They had infiltrated the campus under the cover of a maintenance crew. They made it as far as the East Corridor before Adrian's people because Adrian, it turned out, had people everywhere. The way people from powerful families always did, identified them and passed the information along. By the time the men reached the corridor, Dante and Luca were already there. Elena was not in the corridor when it happened. She was in a study room 3 floors up, in the middle of something far more important than a pair of Marco's soldiers. She was working on the plan. It had been in progress for over a year, a careful, patient, methodical dismantling of everything Marco had built after taking the Moretti Empire. Not a frontal attack. A careful destruction from the inside, like termites in a wall. She had spent months mapping Marco's network, his allies, his enemies, the men who served him out of loyalty and the men who served him out of fear. She had identified 5 key partnerships that held his empire together. Cut those, and the whole structure would begin to collapse. She had already cut 2. Sergio had done the groundwork, quiet conversations in back rooms, favors called in, old debts settled. But the strategy had come entirely from Elena, from the notes she made in school exercise books and stored in encrypted files, from the reports she sent back to Sergio in code, from the 3 years of watching and waiting and thinking. She was not a victim running from her uncle. She was a general conducting a war. She was thinking about the 3rd partnership, a supply chain arrangement between Marco and a shipping family in Barcelona, when a message came through on her secure phone. Sergio, 2 men handled. Your 4 boys are useful. Elena stared at that for a moment. Then she typed back, they're not my boys. Sergio, they behave like they are. She put the phone down and went back to the Barcelona problem. But that night, in the common room where she had begun cautiously, slowly to spend more time, she found herself watching the 4 of them. Adrian at the table with a financial report he was annotating in tiny, precise handwriting. Luca on the couch, ostensibly reading but actually watching the room with that bright, careful gaze. Kai by the window, tea in hand, thoughtful. Dante doing pull-ups on the bar he had installed in the corner, because Dante apparently needed to have something to fight at all times. She thought about what it meant that they had appointed themselves her protection without being asked. She thought about how she had spent 3 years not trusting anyone. She thought about her father, who had trusted the wrong person. Then she opened her laptop and went back to work. It happened in small moments, the way real things always do. It was Luca who got through first, because Luca was patient in a way that surprised her. The charm was still there, it was as much a part of him as his face, but underneath it she began to see something more genuine. He brought her food when she forgot to eat. He told terrible jokes and then laughed at himself when she didn't. He never pushed, never pressed. He just stayed close, at a distance that said, I'm here if you want me, and if you don't, I'll still be here. One evening she told him without meaning to, without quite knowing why, about the night her father died. Just a few sentences. The dining room, the window, the terrible silence after. Luca didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, my father was shot too. I was 7. I didn't understand it until I was 12. A pause. By then I was already someone my father would have been sad to meet. Elena looked at him. It was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. I don't think that's true, she said. He smiled, but it was a different kind of smile. Quieter. You don't know me. I know enough, she said. And she meant it. With Kai, it was different, less about words and more about the quiet understanding of 2 people who were used to being the ones who watched and calculated while the world moved around them. He began leaving books on her table, things she hadn't asked for but found herself wanting to read. Political philosophy, game theory, history of intelligence networks. Once, a collection of Japanese poetry, which she thought was an odd choice until she read it and understood. You want to rebuild it, he said one afternoon. Not just take it back. Rebuild it differently. She looked up at him. What makes you say that? The books you've been reading. The questions you ask in class when you forget not to. A pause. The way you think about loyalty. You're trying to understand why people give it. What it's actually worth. Elena was quiet for a moment. My father was given absolute loyalty by people who then let him be killed. My uncle was given conditional loyalty by people who would serve whoever was strongest. She paused. I want to understand how to build something worth being loyal to. Kai looked at her for a long time. I think you already know, he said. You're just not ready to believe it yet. Dante was the hardest. He didn't do conversation the way the others did. He existed in action and presence, in motion, in the physical language of someone who had grown up in a world where words were unreliable and your body was the only honest thing you had. He started showing up for her early morning training sessions she ran every day at 6, because staying in physical shape was not a luxury. It was survival, and just ran beside her without asking. One morning she took a different route that wound through the more technical obstacle sections of the campus grounds, expecting him to fall behind. He kept pace easily. You're better than you let on, she said. So are you, he said. They ran the rest of the route in silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not uncomfortable, not adversarial. Just two people who understood the same language. After the run, he said, without looking at her, I was the worst one. With the bullying, I was the worst one and I knew it and I didn't stop. Elena stretched her arms over her head. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm not going to say I didn't know better. I did know better. He paused. I just didn't apply it. She lowered her arms and looked at him. His jaw was set. He was not fishing for forgiveness, that much was clear. He was just stating a fact and taking ownership of it. Okay, she said. He looked at her. That's it? What else do you want me to say? A pause. Nothing, I guess. Good, she said. Don't waste the apology. Just be different. And he was. Adrian was the most complex, because Adrian operated on a frequency that was close to her own, precise, strategic, always 3 steps ahead. He didn't do warmth easily. He did honesty, which was something different and in its own way better. He sat across from her one evening and said, Tell me about the plan. She looked at him. What plan? His gray eyes were patient. The one that's been in progress for at least a year. The one you're running from a school exercise book on an encrypted system. The one that's why you really haven't left yet, even though you could have. A pause. Tell me about it. Elena looked at him for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and showed him. She watched his face as he read the slight movements of his eyes, the small tightening around his jaw as he began to understand the scale of it. She watched him scroll to the network map she had built over 18 months, showing Marco's empire and the 5 points she had identified. When he finished reading, he was quiet for a moment. 2 of these are already done, he said. Yes. The Barcelona operation. He looked up at her. That's what you've been working on this month. Yes. Another pause. You need capital. For the 4th point, the financial network. You need someone with access to certain banking connections in Zurich. Elena looked at him carefully. I know. My family has those connections, Adrian said. A silence. Why would you do that? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Because you're right. And because what your uncle did should not stand. A pause that felt careful, like he was measuring each word. And because I want to. Elena held his gaze. Then she looked back at the screen. The Barcelona meeting is in 2 weeks, she said. After that, we moved to point 3. Adrian nodded. And they bent over the laptop together. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena let someone else into the plan. Marco Moretti was not a patient man. He had been patient once, for years, waiting for his brother to make a mistake, and when the moment came, he had acted decisively. That patience had served him well. But he had spent the 3 years since searching for his niece, and the failures were beginning to make him reckless. The attack on the school came on a Wednesday in February. It was not subtle. 12 men in 3 vehicles, with Marco's second in command, a man named Caruso, who had always frightened Elena even as a child, arriving at the school gates at 8 in the morning, presenting falsified documents, and demanding to search the campus for a missing family member. They had gotten as far as the main courtyard before everything went sideways. Because it turned out that when you had 4 boys from 3 of the most powerful criminal families in the world on your side, a man like Caruso walked into something he didn't expect. Elena was in the inner courtyard when it happened. She had been warned 3 minutes earlier by Kai, who had been watching the gate cameras as a matter of habit since the first attack. 3 minutes was enough. She was watching from the second floor window when Caruso walked out into the courtyard and found Adrian Volkov waiting for him. Adrian was alone. He stood in the center of the courtyard in his school jacket, hands in his pockets, looking at Caruso the way you look at something mildly inconvenient. "Mr. Caruso," he said, "I'm Adrian Volkov. I believe you know my father's name." A very long pause. Everyone in the criminal world knew the Volkov name. Everyone knew what it meant. Caruso's face changed. "This campus," Adrian said, "is under Volkov protection. The girl you're looking for is not here. If you continue this search, my father will hear about it before noon. I trust you understand what that means." Caruso looked around the courtyard. He saw Luca casually positioned near the east exit, smiling pleasantly. He saw Dante standing near the west gate, not smiling at all. He saw, through the door of the administration building, the quiet figure of Kai watching with his arms crossed. He looked back at Adrian. "Marco Moretti will hear about this," Caruso said. "Please make sure he does," Adrian said. Caruso left. Elena watched the vehicles pull away from the window above. She felt something tighten in her chest, not fear. Something more complicated than fear. Something that had to do with the 4 boys standing in the courtyard below, and the casual certainty with which they had just put themselves between her and something dangerous. She went downstairs. They were still in the courtyard when she got there. Adrian looked up when she approached. Luca gave her a quick once-over, checking, before relaxing. Dante uncrossed his arms. Kai just watched her. "Caruso," Elena said, "that means Marco is moving faster than I thought." "He's getting desperate," Kai said. "Desperate men make mistakes." "I know." She was already recalculating. "I need to accelerate the timeline." "Tell us what you need," Adrian said. Elena looked at him, then at each of them in turn. She had not wanted this. She had planned this whole thing as a solo operation because in her world, involving others meant risking others, and she had already lost too much. But she looked at these 4 boys who had once been her tormentors and were now standing in a school courtyard having just faced down one of her uncle's most feared men, and she understood something. She was not going to win this war alone. She had never been going to win it alone. Her father had taught her to be self-sufficient. But he had also taught her something else, something she had forgotten in 3 years of fear. The people worth trusting are not the ones who claim to be trustworthy. They're the ones who show you. These 4 had shown her. "Okay," she said, "here's what we need to do." The next 6 weeks were the most intense of Elena's life, and she had lived an intense life. The Barcelona shipping deal fell apart the way she had designed it to quietly, invisibly leaving Marco's network without one of its key supply routes. The Zurich banking connection followed, thanks to Adrian, who made 2 phone calls that Elena had not been able to make herself. The third point, a political ally who had been providing Marco with protection from prosecution, was addressed through a combination of Kai's information gathering and Luca's remarkable ability to have long, charming conversations with people who would normally never say a word. Point 4 had been about money. Point 5 was about testimony. And that was where Elena herself stepped back into the light. She had been gathering evidence for 2 years, not loudly, not visibly, but in the patient way she had learned from her father. Documents, recordings, financial trails. The kind of evidence that wouldn't just destroy Marco in the criminal world, but would reach into the legitimate world to the lawyers, the politicians, the businessmen who preferred not to know where their money came from. She compiled it into a package that took 3 days to put together, and that, when complete, was approximately the most devastating document she had ever seen. It detailed everything. The assassination of Don Carlo Moretti, the 2 attempts on Elena's life, 3 years of criminal operations conducted while Marco publicly presented himself as a respectable businessman. The package went to 6 separate recipients simultaneously: 2 prosecutors, 2 investigative journalists, one international law enforcement organization, and one very old and very respected member of the criminal world who had been a close friend of her father and who had suspected Marco for years. Within 48 hours, the world Marco had built began to shake. The first arrests came on a Tuesday. By Thursday, 3 of Marco's key lieutenants had turned on him in exchange for deals. By Friday, the old friend from her father's world had called a meeting of the major families and formally recognized what the evidence showed. Marco Moretti had murdered his brother and seized control of a family that was not his. Marco was arrested on a Saturday morning at his home, surrounded by the kind of evidence that makes lawyers go quiet. Elena heard about it from Sergio, who sent a single message. "It's done." She was sitting at her desk in her dormitory when she read it. The 4 boys were scattered around her small room, Luca on the floor with his back against the bed, Dante in the corner with his arms folded, Kai in the chair by the window, Adrian standing. They had been there since the previous evening, waiting. She read the message twice. Then she put the phone down on the desk. "It's done," she said. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Luca exhaled a long, low breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. Dante uncrossed his arms. Kai closed his eyes briefly. Adrian, who rarely showed anything, looked at her with an expression that was too complicated for her to fully name. "What happens now?" Luca asked. Elena looked at her desk, at the encrypted files, the careful notes, the 3 years of work that had led to this moment. She thought about her father, about the dining room on a Tuesday evening, about Sergio in the car in the dark, telling her she was the smartest Moretti. "Now I go home," she said, "and I rebuild what was taken." The Moretti Empire did not look the way it had under Don Carlo, and that was entirely by design. Elena spent the first 6 months back in her family's world the way a surgeon spends the first months after a long operation, carefully, methodically, making sure nothing was missed, nothing was left to chance. She met with allies and assessed them honestly. She met with enemies and offered them a single choice. She rebuilt partnerships that had fractured. She cut ties that were rotten beyond saving. She was 18 years old and she was running one of the most powerful crime families in the country. And there were men twice her age who had tried to be dismissive about that right up until the moment they understood what she actually was. They didn't try again. Sergio had cried when he saw her, which had surprised her. She had not thought of him as someone who cried. He had looked at her for a long time and then said, "Your father would be so proud." She had held herself very still until she trusted herself to answer. "I know," she said. "I think I finally believe it." The Black Kings graduated from Blackridge at the end of the school year, the way they had always been going to. They each returned to their respective worlds: Volkov networks in the east, De Luca operations in the south, Nakamura connections across 3 continents, Rivera territory in the city. They were heirs now, stepping into roles that had been prepared for them since before they could walk. But the 4 of them kept coming back. It was not something that had been formally decided. There had been no conversation, no declaration, no neat arrangement put into words. It was more organic than that, more honest. They came back because Elena was where they wanted to be, and because she had stopped making the case for why they shouldn't. Luca arrived one evening with food and a wide smile and an apology for being 3 hours late, which he blamed on traffic and which was almost certainly not traffic. He stayed for a week. Kai sent a message one morning saying he had information she might need regarding a potential threat from the east. He arrived that afternoon and didn't mention leaving. Dante showed up unannounced at 6 in the morning and went directly to the training room, which Elena found less surprising than she expected to. Adrian came last, and when he arrived he set a folder on her desk and said, "The Zurich contact has offered a long-term arrangement. I told him I'd discuss it with you first." And Elena had looked at that at the implicit acknowledgement of her authority, coming from someone who had never easily given acknowledgement to anyone, and felt something settle in her chest. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me about it." He sat down. He told her. They talked for 3 hours, and at the end of it they had built something that would benefit both families. And when they were done, he looked at her across the desk with those steady gray eyes and said, "You don't need us, you know." "I know," she said. "But," she considered the word, "but I want you here." and I'm done making decisions based on fear." She paused. "I trust you, all of you, and I don't say that easily." "I know," he said. And for Adrian Volkov, that was the equivalent of a speech. What the underworld saw, in the months that followed, was something it had never seen before. Not exactly. It saw the Moretti heir take her place at the head of her family's empire. It saw her rebuild it on different foundations. On accountability, on loyalty that was earned rather than demanded, on alliances that were partnerships rather than arrangements born of fear. It saw her make decisions that were colder and cleaner and more precise than most men in her position could manage. And it saw, around her, 4 of the most dangerous young men in 3 countries, each the heir to his own powerful world, who operated not as her subordinates and not as her superiors, but as something the underworld didn't quite have a word for: partners, equals, people who had chosen to be there. The word that spread was queen. Elena heard it for the first time at a formal gathering of allied families, spoken by a gray-haired man who had known her father. He said it as a title, as a statement of fact, and the room received it the same way, not as flattery, but as recognition. She didn't flinch from it. She didn't deny it. She had worked for 3 years and bled for it in ways that would never fully show. She had earned it. She looked around the room at Sergio near the door, at the allied families assembled, at the 4 men positioned around her who could have been anywhere in the world and had chosen to be here. She thought about a girl in a worn uniform at the back of a classroom, keeping her head down, enduring. She thought about her father. Then she looked forward, at the room full of people who had once not known she existed, and let herself be exactly who she was. Elena Moretti, the last of her name, the heir to everything, the queen, and she was only just getting started.